Good evening and welcome to SkullNet 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski and I will be reading the news bulletin for you today. Starting off, we have the Ukraine update, day 869 of a conflict, where NATO allies at their Washington summit have said Ukraine's future is in NATO and its path to membership is irreversible. Making the declaration in a statement published today, Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, said Ukraine's membership to NATO is not a question of if, but when. The member states criticized China in stronger language than before for assisting Russia's invasion of Ukraine, calling it a decisive enabler, supplying components for military equipment and chemicals for explosives. This increases the threat Russia poses to its neighbors and to Euro-Atlantic security, they declared in their summit communiqué. The first F-16 fighter jets are on their way to Ukraine and will be flying missions this summer, the Dutch and Danish governments have said. These will be the first of about 85 of the combat aircraft that have been committed to Kiev to turn around its fortunes on the battlefield, and Ukraine signaled more may be to come. A Russian missile attack on the Odessa region killed 2 people and damaged port infrastructure on Wednesday, the region's governor said. Russia's security service, the FSB, claimed to have thwarted an attempt on Ukrainian intelligence services to induce a crew member on the aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov Russia's security service, the FSB, claimed to have thwarted an attempt by Ukrainian intelligence services to induce a crew member on the aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov in Murmansk to sabotage the ship. The Kremlin has criticized the new British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, for his comments affirming that Ukraine can use British-supplied Storm Shadow missiles against legitimate targets within Russia. Keir Starmer is expected to promise that the UK will support Ukraine for as long as it takes, as he confirms Britain's £3 billion a year funding package for Kiev will continue for as long as needed. At the NATO summit on Thursday, Starmer will warn that the frontline defense of the Euro-Atlantic region is the Ukrainian trenches. Britain's new Defence Secretary, John Healey, has visited Ukraine promising artillery guns and shells and 90 Brimstone missiles. The UK has also confirmed it will contribute £40 million to NATO's comprehensive assistance package for Ukraine and the UK-administered International Fund for Ukraine will place a new order worth £300 million for 120,000 rounds of 152mm artillery ammunition. Next, we have the Israel and Gaza latest, where the Gaza Health Ministry has said that more than 38,345 Palestinians have been killed and 88,295 have been injured in Gaza since the 7th of October. The statement added that 50 Palestinians were killed and 54 injured in the past 24 hours. Foreign surgeons who have worked in Gaza in recent months have said that Israeli-made weapons designed to spray high levels of shrapnel are causing horrific injuries to civilians in Gaza and disproportionately harming children. Israeli airstrikes pounded parts of Gaza's biggest city today, Hamas said, after Israel's military declared an end to its operation in an eastern district that saw Gaza City's heaviest combat in months. The upsurge in fighting, bombardment, and displacement followed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's statement in late June that the war in its intense phase is about to end. Residents of Gaza were trapped in houses and bodies lay uncollected in the streets under an intense new Israeli assault today, even as Washington pushed for a peace deal at talks in Egypt and Qatar. Hamas said the massive Israeli assault on Gaza City this week could wreck efforts to finally end the war, just as negotiations have entered the home stretch. The White House National Security spokesperson, John Kirby, has told CNN that the United States is cautiously optimistic about Gaza ceasefire talks, adding that gaps between the two sides could be narrowed. When asked if a ceasefire deal was close, Kirby said, "We are cautiously optimistic that things are moving in a good direction. There are still gaps remaining between the two sides. We believe that those gaps can be narrowed, and that's what Brett McGurk and CIA Director Bill Burns are trying to do now." In a statement today, Hamas said the mediators have not yet provided the groups with any updates regarding Gaza ceasefire negotiations. It also accused Israel of stalling to gain time and thwart the current round of talks. An Israeli negotiation team is heading on Thursday to Cairo to hold further Gaza ceasefire talks, according to a statement from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office. The statement also said that Netanyahu met throughout the day with negotiators who returned from Doha. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said he met visiting U.S. envoy Brett McGurk today and discussed progress in reaching a Gaza hostage release deal. Gallant, according to a statement from his office, said that they also spoke about the delivery of critical munitions, some of which will be sent to Israel in the coming days. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has said President Biden and his administration are complicit in what he called Israeli war crimes and violations of international law in Gaza, and he called for sanctions against Israel. The war in Gaza has contributed to a sharp rise in anti-Semitic incidents in Europe. The European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, FRA, said in a report released today. Shifting our focus to the UK, where the SNP renews call for new UK government to abolish the two-child cap and rape clause. The SNP has renewed calls for Westminster's two-child limit to be scrapped by the UK government following new statistics which show nearly 1.6 million children across the UK are affected by the policy. Research published by the Child Poverty Action Group shows that 1 in 9 children across the UK are impacted by the UK government policy, with families losing up to £3,455 per year. SNP MSP Colette Stevenson, who convenes Holyrood's Social Justice and Social Security Committee, said, "Scrapping the two-child limit must happen without delay. These latest figures renew the long-standing position of the SNP that the UK government must scrap this hated policy and prove they are serious about tackling child poverty." Even Scottish Labour is now urging the UK government to act on this, a welcome change from Anas Sarwar saying the best way out of poverty is to work, just days ago. She went on to say the Child Poverty Action Group assesses that abolishing the two-child limit is the most cost-effective way to reduce child poverty. The new UK government needs to listen to the experts and act at pace for the benefit of thousands of children set to be forced into poverty because of this cruel policy. While Scotland waits for Westminster to act, the SNP Scottish Government will continue to work on its defining mission to eradicate child poverty through policies which help keep 100,000 children out of poverty, including the Scottish Child Payment. Next story is the UK GDP rising by 0.4% in May. The UK economy has returned to growth after a period of stagnation after a washout when activity flatlined, resuming the recovery from last year's recession. The Office for National Statistics has showed that GDP is on the increase by 0.4% month on month, double on what city economists had forecast. Over the 3 months to the end of May, the economy grew by 0.9%, the fastest rate for more than 2 years. Rishi Sunak has argued during the election campaign that the economy had turned a corner under the Conservatives. Growth returned in the first quarter of the year, with the economy expanding by 0.7%. However, it flatlined in April, the first month of the second quarter. 1 week on since Labour's landslide victory, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, has promised to kickstart the economy by making it the new government's national mission to secure the highest sustained growth in the G7. Reeves said, taken the urgent action necessary to fix the foundations of our economy to rebuild Britain and make every part of Britain better off. As inflation comes down, the Bank of England is expected to start cutting interest rates, possibly as soon as next month, in a move that will provide relief and hope for households facing sharply higher mortgage rates. In the US, President Biden hints at the UK needing to get closer to EU in meeting with Starmer. Joe Biden has appeared to back Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer with his ambition for Britain to have closer ties with the European Union, as the two leaders held talks at the White House. The US President declared the US and the UK the best of allies, as he met the Prime Minister in the Oval Office, describing Britain as the knot that tied the transatlantic relationship together. He went on to say, I kind of see you guys as the knot tying the transatlantic alliance together. The closer you are with Europe, he told Starmer. Starmer used the NATO summit in Washington to build relationships with leaders on the European stage as he tries to seal an EU-UK security pact, and has been joined on the trip by Nick Thomas-Symonds, his Minister for European Relations. The Prime Minister was also keen on showing the UK's commitment to NATO, as well as supporting Ukraine, that he will stick with plans to spend at least £3 billion every year on military support to Kiev. Starmer congratulated Biden on hosting the 75th anniversary of the summit, hailing a bigger NATO, a stronger NATO, and a NATO that will resolve that we need. And a NATO with the resolve that we need, was the quote from Keir Starmer. Continuing to say, the special relationship is so important, it's forged in difficult circumstances, endured for so long, and stronger now than ever. In China's building 2/3 of the world's wind and solar projects. A report has found that wind and solar power construction in China is now nearly twice as much as the rest of the world, and are also on track to secure a 1,200 gigawatt of installed wind and solar capacity by the end of 2024, 6 years ahead of Beijing's target. The report stated, the unabated wave of construction guarantees that China will continue leading in wind and solar installation in the near future, far ahead of the rest of the world. Let me just read that again. The report stated, the unabated wave of construction guarantees that China will continue leading in wind and solar installation in the near future is far ahead of the rest of the world. Between March 2023 and March 2024, China installed more solar than it had in the previous 3 years combined, and more than the rest of the world combined for 2023. China has experienced a surge in renewables in recent times, encouraged by strong government support. Xi Jinping, China's president, has stressed that need for new quality productive forces The findings also concluded China is the leading country in global renewable energy production at a time where the US are worried surrounding Chinese overcapacity and dumping in the solar industry. However, the geopolitical tensions around Europe, which forced many countries' attention to energy supplies and major power cuts in parts of China in recent years, Chinese officials are now wary about energy security. In Scotland, there's a record of inward investment. For the 9th year running, Scotland is the top of is the top performing part of the UK outside of London, as consulting network EY reports a record 142 foreign direct investment (FDI) projects secured in 2023. Energy supply was the leading investment type in Scotland, with 40 projects secured in 2023, double of what was seen the previous year. EY attributes this investment shift to Scotland's increasing levels of low carbon and clean tech investment, meaning many of these projects will be spread out across Scotland's rural areas. Scottish cities will still get their own investment projects in the form of digital technology, business services, and transport and logistics, putting Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Aberdeen in the top 10 UK cities for foreign investment. The US has remained the single biggest originator of FDI projects, accounting for 27 projects, or 19% of Scotland's total during the year, the lowest proportion in the past decade. Projects from Germany doubled to 20, a decade high, making it the second biggest source of projects into Scotland, followed by France with 10. 69% of investors surveyed by EY are planning to establish or expand operations in the UK over the next year, and 26% are planning to invest in Scotland, second only to London. When investors were surveyed on which location specifically, 23% are targeting Edinburgh and 9% Glasgow. This is 23% of those considering Scotland. 23 were targeting Edinburgh and 9% Glasgow, putting those cities in second and fourth, respectively, among all UK cities. Investors' main criteria when considering investing in the UK includes access to regional grants and incentives, the local skills base, and the availability of business partners and suppliers. Commenting, S&P MSP Kenneth Gibson said, "The S&P is prioritizing driving economic growth to enable us to tackle poverty and improve public services. The record inward investment highlights that the actions of the SNP government are making a real difference. Scotland is becoming an increasingly attractive investment destination thanks to the SNP prioritizing supporting the energy transition, enabling the development of cutting-edge technologies, and ensuring businesses have access to the skilled labor they require." She went on to say that the SNP is focused on delivering economic growth for the people of Scotland, and that hard work will continue to ensure that further economic developments and high-quality jobs are delivered across Scotland. In the next story, the Scottish Government, income tax receipts higher than anticipated. An extra £447 million has been allocated to the Scottish budget for 2025 to 26. This comes after an HMRC report on 2022 to 23 outturn for Scottish income tax. The data provided in a report by HMRC on 2022 to 23 income tax reconciliation showed the Scottish Government has calculated the income tax net position for 2022 to 23 as £257 million. The income tax net position, which is the difference between the revenue raised and the block grant agreement, is positive of £257 million, which is an increase in comparison to previous years. Scotland raised around £15.2 billion in income tax in 2022 to 23, which was more revenue than forecast at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is why the Scottish Government budget for 25 to 26 will be £447 million better off. Scotland's income tax liabilities grew around £1.6 million between 2021 to 22 and 2022 to 23, which stands at an increase of 10.5% in the rest of the UK. Shona Robison, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government, said, "I look forward to engaging with a committee in the coming months ahead of the 2025 to 26 Scottish budget." This report, published suggests the Scottish Government continues to benefit from the income tax devolution power from Westminster. The Scottish Government has also announced £7 million of funding to support electric vehicle infrastructure. The Scottish Government is providing over £7 million across Aberdeen City Council, Aberdeenshire Council, the Highland Council, Moray Council and Dundee City Council to encourage greater private investment in the electric vehicle EV charging network. The Scottish Government's vision to grow the public electric vehicle charging network at pace and scale requires significant private investment. The Scottish Government say that this funding is targeted in a way which will attract private sector investment, particularly focusing on more rural areas of Scotland, and this is reflected in the financial awards. The funding will enable local authorities to continue to grow Scotland's public EV charging network through partnership working with the private sector to operate existing EV charge points and deliver new EV charge point infrastructure. The benefits for the public will be the introduction of more new and more reliable EV charge points across Scotland, supporting the Scottish Government's commitment to phasing out the need for new petrol and diesel cars and vans by 2030, reducing transport emissions and protecting the climate. Cabinet Secretary for Transport Fiona Hislop said, "I'm pleased that the Scottish Government is providing over £7 million in targeted support to attract in further private investment in our publicly accessible electric vehicle charging network. The scale of our ambition to decarbonise transport cannot be met alone, and I expect that our commitment for approximately 24,000 additional public charge points by 2030 will largely be met by the private sector. This can only happen, however, if the conditions exist to support this investment, which is exactly what our Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Fund is working to achieve, and with a particular focus in our rural and island communities. As a direct result of our previous investment per head of our population, Scotland has more public EV charging points than any other part of the UK, except London. We also benefit from more rapid public EV charge points than any other UK region. We have over 5,600 currently, and are well on target to have 6,000 public EV charge points by 2026. Through increasing private sector investment, with the private sector investing between £40 and £55 million in public EV charging in Scotland in 2024 alone. A new exhibition reveals Scotland's nuclear secrets. A new exhibition at the National Museum of Scotland explores Scotland's critical position on the front line of a Cold War. Cold War Scotland features dozens of objects on display for the first time, including secret intelligence training documents and a map of central Scotland marked to highlight targets under threat of nuclear attack. Scotland's unique geography and topography provided a useful base for NATO military preparations and research during the Cold War, a 40-year nuclear standoff between the USA and the Soviet Union following the end of the Second World War. Opening this Saturday, 13th June, the exhibition tells the stories of the Scots at the centre of a global conflict. For the first time, visitors will see an ordnance survey map of Scotland, hand-painted to highlight areas that were expected to be affected in the event of a nuclear attack, particularly major cities, military bases, and dockyards. Created in the 1980s, it is color-coded to indicate the point of explosion and scale of the impact across the Central Belt and beyond. Atomic power brought jobs and investment to some of the country's most remote areas. But as global tensions mounted, this threat of attack or nuclear disaster became part of everyday life. Cold War Scotland explores both the visible and invisible legacies of the war in Scotland. The impact of the war still lingers in Scottish politics, culture, and memory. Scots played an active role in the global conflict as soldiers, for example, within intelligence services and as part of the voluntary civil defences. The exhibition also draws on Scotland's rich history of Cold War era protest and activism. First-hand accounts include a young mother who decorated her daughter's pram with Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament (CND) badges. A rattle made for an old laundry detergent bottle emblazoned with a CND logo was given to them during the peace marches of the early 1980s and is on display in the exhibition. The exhibition also reveals the physical remains of a Cold War, the ruined bases, forgotten bunkers, and decommissioned nuclear power stations still evident across the Scottish landscape. This infrastructure became part of the fabric of the local communities, none more so than the US-controlled listening and monitoring station at RAF Edzell in Angus, now commemorated with its own bespoke tartan. Other highlights include artwork from Glasgow's 1951 exhibition of industrial power and a toy nuclear power station representing the spirit of optimism, progress, and modernity in post-war Britain. In contrast, the exhibition includes a Geiger counter used by farmers in East Ayrshire to test for radiation in sheep following the Chernobyl disaster, illustrating the enduring but unseen impact of a Cold War on Scotland's landscape. The exhibition will run from 13th June 2024 until 26th of January 2025. Lastly, we have the 29th anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide being commemorated. Today is the 29th anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide and also marks the very first International Day of Reflection and Commemoration of the Srebrenica genocide. The footage playing behind me now is from the memorial taking place in 2022. In a post on X, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said, "May the memory of Srebrenica strengthen our collective resolve to build a world free from the scourge of genocide, where justice and peace prevail. We must fight against the division and intolerance, stand up for human rights, and promote mutual understanding and reconciliation." In the days following the fall of Srebrenica, on 11th of July 1995, 8,372 men and boys were brutally and senselessly murdered. At today's ceremony, the remains of 14 victims were laid to rest. The youngest was 17, the oldest 68. The International Commission on Missing Persons, ICMP, has been dedicated to applying advanced forensic techniques to identify remains found in the region. More than 7,000 of the 8,000 victims of the genocide have been identified, the vast majority through DNA testing. The DNA-led process has been indispensable because the perpetrators of the Srebrenica genocide tried to hide the evidence of their crime by systematically digging up mass graves in the weeks and months after the murders and distributing the bodies of victims in secondary and tertiary clandestine graves across eastern Bosnia. We remember each and every one of the victims of genocide. And so that does wrap us up for the evening. But before I go, I will remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. I've been Patryk Witkowski, and goodbye. Thank you for watching.